Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to speak on this important conference on digitalization in the energy sector, and I would add in the energy transition. This is a topic that we dedicate a lot of focus to in Eurelectric, the trade association of the European electricity industry. And let me take this moment also to bring a shout out to TESAP, our Turkish member. We really value the deep and constructive cooperation with Turkey on a number of critical issues for the transition to a net zero economy. Let me start off by saying that this transition is going to make things very different, and digital technologies are going to play a key part in this. I like to call this era the age of zero, and this age of zero is one that is characterized by a very special set of characteristics. It's a time where we're going to see a lot of exponential developments. It's a time of disruption. It's a time of a new interconnectedness. It's a time when we need to think differently about people, about power, and about platforms, digital platforms. We need to think differently about people. Over the next 2 decades, the customer base of utilities across the world is going to change fundamentally. The boomers, the people that were born in the baby boom after the Second World War, will gradually decrease as a share in our customer base. And Generation Z, and for me that stands for Generation Zero, their share will gradually increase. So Generation Z is the generation of people that are today between 18 and 25 years old. Imagine a life of such a person. Every year since they were born was a heat record. Every year was another failed attempt to create a political deal or political measures that would sufficiently address climate change. Every year was a time of terrifying examples of extreme weather and significant impacts on our ecosystems. So it's no wonder that Generation Z is more interested in their carbon footprint than previous generations. It's no wonder that they're more willing to spend more money on electricity if it's clean. It's no wonder that they're also interested in being involved and actively shaping energy services themselves, for instance, by putting a solar panel on the roof. And over the next 2 decades, Generation Z will grow significantly in our customer base. In the 2020s, their numbers will grow by 140% in the customer base, and over the next 2 decades, they will be significantly bigger than the share of boomers. Now, Generation Z is different in their expectations to a power company, different in their values, and they're also different in the ways they communicate and the channels that they use. They are much more digital. So we need to think differently about people in order to succeed with the energy transition. We also need to think differently about power. It was a big deal when electricity finally reached this little village in southern Europe in the 1960s. You can see that the entire little village is gathered as electricity finally arrived. And you can imagine living in that house in the background where up to that specific point when electricity arrived, there would have been quite dark in the evenings. Now, the sources of electricity back in the 60s were, of course, coal, gas, nuclear, but the power of the past is not the power of the future. And some of these critical sources are today the very reason of our energy liability, not our energy security. Think about coal, think about gas. We get big shares of our supplies of these commodities from Russia, which today is waging an unjustified war against another European country. So we need to change our notion of power, not only for climate reasons, but also for security reasons. The good news is that electricity becomes the key vector for the energy transition for both of those reasons. Homegrown electricity that we don't have to import from elsewhere is a strength both for our climate, but also for our energy security. And in Eurelectric, we talk about the 2020s as the electric decade. A decade of immense investments, a decade of exponential growth, a decade where we're going to add 700,000 megawatts of renewable capacity to the grids in Europe. A decade where we will invest more than 400 billion euros in distribution grids. A massive transformation, ultimately for the good of Europe. But in order to succeed with that, we need to leverage our platforms. And by platforms, I do not mean this type of platform. I mean the digital platforms, as in the context of the platform economy. Platform economy is customer services and economic value creation facilitated by digital platforms. A few years ago, we defined a new vision in Eurelectric for the distribution grids. We called it from wires to platforms, signifying the shift from a mere transportation mode of electricity from A to B to facilitation of electricity services, energy services in a much more complex environment. That's the shift from wires to platforms. But the shift, the changes in our platforms goes way beyond that. Think about the development of computers over the last decades. There used to be something called Moore's Law, which was about the doubling of density of a microchip and the halving of the price of that microchip, signifying the pace of the digital revolution. Now, Moore's Law today is becoming more and more irrelevant, and the pace of the change is getting much faster, because it's not only about the size of the chip, it's also about the memory, it's about the networks that transmit between computers, and it's about the software, the AI, that is a fundamental game changer when it comes to the pace and the intelligence of our digital platforms. Back in the early 2000s, there was an American author, a guru, an AI specialist, and a visionary called Ray Kurzweil, who wrote a very famous book called The Singularity is Near. The singularity is a very fascinating concept, and at the time it was perhaps seen even as a bit wacky. The singularity is the idea that you achieve a state in history where it is no longer possible to really distinguish the virtual from the real, and where the advent of superhuman artificial intelligence will help human beings transcend their biological limitations. Sounds a bit crazy perhaps, but let's think about how much things have changed. In fact, I would say that if he wrote that book today, probably he would have changed the title to The Singularity is Here. Think about the role of digital in everything we do, and think about how many things AI are taking over. Here's just a couple of headings from the last few years. JP Morgan has an AI that can write better ad copy than human beings. AI is taking over the role of doctors in spotting cancer. AI is taking over the entire editorial work at Microsoft. And AI is taking over a whole range of tasks in the energy sector. Many people argue, in fact, that running the distribution grids of the future with hundreds of thousands of megawatts of renewables, with millions of electric cars, with millions of heat pumps, is only going to be possible if we fully automate it and use AI everywhere we can. AI is finding its way into all types of operations. If it's about combustion in a conventional power plant, the use of AI to optimize the temperature and the level of burning at all times to ensure efficiency is already a reality. Whether it's about predictive maintenance of grids, whether it's about micro-profiling of customers, whether it's about fraud detection, everywhere we look in the power sector today, AI is finding its way in. And here, ladies and gentlemen, it's just crucial that we don't fall asleep at the wheel. Because if you race along the highway in a Tesla at 100 kilometers an hour, well, it might be very convenient to take a little nap. But if that car crashes, who's responsible? And it's the same for companies. We are surrendering a lot of decision power to machines, but we're still liable for their decisions. So we must not fall asleep at the wheel. And we must not make the mistakes that other big tech companies have done. Instead, we should try to make sure that we leverage the increased force of these platforms to connect with our new customer base. Remember, the Gen Z. The Gen Z is operating in a very different way. I read the other day that the definition of a Gen Z is a young person of 18 to 25 years old that will never pick up his or her phone. Why would they? They're already connected in hundreds of other ways through different platforms. They communicate in a different way, they have different values, different expectations, and they want to take ownership of the energy transition. They want to be involved themselves. So when we try to harness the force of our strengthened platforms to reach out to this new generation of customers, we should learn from the best of the tech companies, and I'm sure there's a whole literature out there about how to do that. For the sake of simplicity today, I would just sum it up with one word, and that is fish. For me, in this context, fish stands for fun, identity, simplicity, and help. I'm convinced that if we as a power company, as a power sector, are better able to make it fun to engage with us, if we're better at relating to the identity of the new generation, the Generation Zero, if we can provide simpler services and we can genuinely help them engage in the energy transition and get the energy services they want, when they want them, where they want them, I think we will be more successful in the energy transition, but also in providing value to our customers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the attention. The world around us is changing. The age of zero is upon us. We need to think differently about people, power, and platforms, and make the most of this exciting new digital age. Thank you very much.